On today's episode of the Alumni podcast, we dive into all things HUMED and FlexMed, a non-traditional pathway to be accepted into the Icahn School of Medicine. Let's dive in. So with us today, we have Dr. Nathan Kase, Dr. David Muller, and Maisy Meyer. And I would like to allow them to introduce themselves. So, Maisy, let's start with you. Who are you?
Sure. A complicated question to start off with. I am a second-year medical student here at Mount Sinai. I graduated from Brown in 2022, so I'm a recent college grad, and I came straight through to medical school. I was admitted via FlexMed to Sinai, so I'm happy and excited to talk about my experience.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Dr. Muller?
So I was going to start by saying that I'm a Sinai lifer, but next to Dr. Kase, I'm pales in comparison. But I've been here since I was an intern in internal medicine. I stayed on as faculty, started a home visit program initially, and then almost 20 years ago came into this role as Dean for Medical Education. So I've been in the medical school all that time, overseeing the MD program, and then my clinical practice is taking care of people who are homebound.
Wow. Thank you. And Dr. Kase?
Well, David took half my lines away. But I am senior. I've been at Sinai since 1951, with an interim period of 20 years at Yale. I've done just about everything at Sinai, so I could say I am of Sinai, as well as an advocate for Sinai in every way. And one of the things I'm most proud of is whatever we call HUMED now as part of FlexMed.
Thank you. And that's the perfect transition into, can you explain what HUMED is and why you decided to create it? And give us some dates, please.
You're going to censor this out, but I've just spent an hour talking.
I know.
When I returned from Yale in 1981 or so, I had an experience there which was very informative. It was a great university medical school, but it had a catchment area, as I said, equivalent of several blocks in Corona, Queens. And here I returned to Mount Sinai, where there was Elmhurst, there was Mount Sinai Hospital, a VA hospital, fabulous residency programs, an absolutely outstanding clinical faculty, a fabulous basic science faculty, and yet we didn't get the medical school candidates that we wanted. We lost them to the reputation, the prestigious schools. Mm-hmm. The GPEP report came out at just as I was formulating a sense that we needed to spruce up our recruitment to the medical school. And that I created the HUMED component of FlexMed at that time, believing that a liberal arts background was essential for a successful career in medicine, but also a successful professional opportunity to offer help and succor to those that needed help.
So, just to make it clear, HUMED stands for
Humanities Medicine. May I give you that little piece? One of the colleges that I went to was Brandeis, because it didn't have a medical school, it had a great reputation.
And around what year was this?
This was at the start. It was 88 or something like that, 1988. And I arrived on this gorgeous, gorgeous campus, HUMED, in Waltham. And I saw these various encampments, bonfires, tents, and signs, no ham on campus. And I went to the president And I said, I didn't understand. Oh, don't worry. That's because they're protesting our decision to serve non-kosher food.
Dr. Muller, in your own words, can you please explain what HUMED is and what FlexMed is and what FlexMed stands for?
Sure. So FlexMed is the natural extension of the Humanities and Medicine program. The Humanities and Medicine program was an early assurance program to medical school for students who had a humanities background or taking a humanities major as undergraduates. And all we did was take the concept and expand it out to any student in any school, not the initial small group of schools that were part of the pilot program. It didn't make a difference to us what major you had. If at that point in your education as a sophomore, you were poised enough, mature enough, thoughtful enough to apply to medical school and meet our expectations or have those credentials, we thought you'd be a great match for what medicine needs, which is, yes, an immersion in the humanities for those for whom it's really important, but it could be an immersion in biochemistry or in computer science or in engineering or in a million other things.
That's terrific. And how have you seen, what has the success of the program been?
What has the success been? So I think it's been enormously successful. The way I take the question is, how do we know that it's been successful? So we chose specifically not to measure success based on size. In other words, the HUMED program started with a very, very small cohort. It slowly grew over the course of time. When we created FlexMed, we increased that to about somewhere between a quarter and a third of the entire entering class. But we weren't going to measure success by the metric of could we fill the class with FlexMed students? Because the answer is we could easily fill the class. We could fill 4 classes with FlexMed candidates, and their credentials and accomplishments are just remarkable. The success that the way we chose to define success was the degree to which this program became more widely known across schools all over North America, and also across all majors, so it wasn't really just humanities related, and the degree to which that contributed to the diversity of experiences, the diversity of thinking in the class, and how did that contribute to the environment here that students entered as a medical student? Did it enrich the environment or not? And the sense that we have is that the answer is yes to all of those things. Many more schools across North America are familiar with the program. Students come to us from every conceivable academic background. And I think the student experience has been that it is incredibly enriching because you end up as a medical student here meeting people who come to medicine through all these different pathways.
That's terrific and leads very well into Maisy that we have here today. So, Maisy, why FlexMed? Why Mount Sinai? Why are you here? Why did you choose to be here?
Well, I can be very candid. I applied to FlexMed because my dad told me to.
Are you from
That's
New
a measure
York?
of success right there.
No. My dad, I remember he called me in December of 2019 when I was filling out my application. I was 19 years old when I applied to medical school, which was extremely, it was a little bit stressful, but also just like such a gift that I was even able to do that. But he called me and he was like, you have to apply to this program, you have to apply to this program. And I was like deep in finals. I was like, Dad, I cannot do this right now. Like, please don't make me do this right now. And he was like, no, you have to do it, you have to do it. So I came home for winter break that year, and I did the applications. And as time went on, I got more and more invested in the program and more invested in Sinai and really excited about the opportunity until like by the time the acceptances were rolling around, I was like, oh my God, I really, really hope that I get into this program. And I think a lot of my friends, like we reflect on this pretty often, the friends that I have here that are FlexMed students, just that, you know, I think that you would be hard pressed to find a student that would not look at a program like FlexMed and say, oh my God, that's a huge benefit. Like you have flexibility to take the classes that you want in undergrad, you have flexibility to do things after undergrad before you come to medical school, you have the flexibility to not take the MCAT. Like people are never gonna say no to that if given the opportunity. But I think the real gift is that that program is associated with Sinai specifically, because I think you could have told me it was any school and I would have applied and gotten excited and accepted it. But the fact that it's here is just so lucky, because I have never really like felt this way about an institution, like felt proud to be a part of it and proud to be a student here and to be a voice to be a student here. It really, I never felt that way about an institution.
What was the application process like? So from when you applied to when you stepped foot through the door, what did that time period look like?
Complicated and very emotional. So the application starts with a bunch of essays, recommendations. You have to get recommendations from both high school teachers and college professors, which I think was the biggest struggle for me, is like how do you know college professors as a sophomore in college? It's really tough. You have to get those recommendations, you have to submit your grades, and mainly I think a lot of it is the writing. So like what you write about in terms of like why you want to be a doctor, what you'll do with the extra flexibility that's provided to you by the program, and sort of like what it means to you to be a doctor and what's important to you about being a doctor, and sort of the standard things in a medical school application with the added aspect of like why do you want this flexibility, and what are you going to do with it. And then I was actually right after, of course, December of 2019, in the winter of 2020 was when COVID pandemic began. So we were the first class to not have in-person interviews. So we ended up having to do a Casper test, which is a like decision-making ethics test. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was an online exam. And then we had interviews on Zoom. It was the most stressful day of my whole life, was that interview. I got off that interview and I was convinced that I did not get in.
Who did you interview with? Like, Dr. Muller, are you part of the interviewing process?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay.
I actually I don't even remember.
Yeah,
I just remember it was a faculty member and a student.
Okay.
And
A current FlexMed student or just?
No, it was a fourth year medical student
Okay.
at the time. So would have been like many years ago. And I was just so wound up. I was like, truly, like, I think that the content of that interview immediately left my head the second it was done. So I was like, I will not retain anything that just happened. I just am glad it's over. I'm glad it's done. And I have this distinct memory of July 1st. They had told us that the results were going to come out in middle to the end of July, but they ended up being on July 1st. And I was totally not expecting it. And I had been studying for the MCAT all of that summer because I didn't want to take time in between medical school and undergrad. And so I was studying for the MCAT. I took out all my Kaplan books and laid them out on the kitchen table at my parents' house that summer. And I was getting ready to start studying for the day. And I was like, to put off studying for the day, I'll check my email for 30 seconds. And I checked my email and I had gotten the email. And I just immediately started bawling. I was so excited. My parents weren't even there. My parents were like on a business trip somewhere, I think. And I like called them both. And they were crying and I was crying. And I called my friends and they were all crying. It was just like such a great day.
That's incredible. And then when did you first step foot into the school?
A long time after, because
Yep.
we didn't have revisit until like the year that we were matriculating.
That's terrific. And what did you commented a lot on FlexMed and this program? It provides the flexibility that you need or want. What did you do at that time?
So I was originally I applied to Brown as a chemistry or a biochemistry major, and I was intending to do a second major in French and French studies. I loved French in high school. And so as I was applying to FlexMed, I was actually in the process of, so I ended up being a chemistry major instead of biochemistry because why make your life easier, right? Do the harder thing. And so I did that. And I had already completed a lot of the requirements, but I was sort of like I didn't feel like I was getting what I wanted out of the French major, especially once classes went remotely. And so actually, as I was applying to FlexMed, I was in the process of sort of conceptualizing a different way to incorporate humanities into my education. And I've always been very interested in medical illustration and scientific communication. It's always been like sort of a side passion of mine, and making sure that medical materials are accessible to people and accessible to patients, and sort of providing patients the materials to to be autonomous and have a say in their care.
That's really remarkable. And hearing more about you and your story, I definitely get this sense of why the program started. However, I'd love to hear from Dr. Muller and Dr. Kase about what type of doctor, like what were the character when you started to create the program, what need did HUMED fill? What doctor were you looking for?
Actually, I'm going to shift the emphasis of your question.
Sure.
It wasn't so much searching for an outcome, but searching for a preparation to be a sensitive, sensitized, altruistic, principled person who understood herself well enough to provide sensitive, useful care. So it was a matter of a background of experience that went beyond the surmise, the adolescent, I know everything. It's a background that understood the needs of others and their own biases and prejudices. So it was all a matter of creating a group of people who were prepared to offer good care and sensitive care and good care.
Yes, we definitely need that. And Dr. Muller, could you kind of piggyback off of Dr. Kase and explain what those characteristics are that you look for?
So I'm actually going to shift it a little bit too,
Sure.
and now talk about characteristics, because I think that when we sat down as a group in trying to envision what the next step was going to be for HUMED, the two things that ended up standing out the most, and all those other things that Maisy and Dr. Kase described are obviously very important, but the two things that stood out to us most were some of what Maisy talked about. So the intellectual freedom. So that's not really about the characteristics of the person, but the fact that as a traditional pre-med, you're so worried about your grades every minute of every day. You're worried that every activity you're involved in looks good on an ultimate application to medical school. That is such a cloud that hangs over people's heads. The idea of giving someone an acceptance early and saying, you're in. Don't sweat it. You're in. We love you. You're coming to medical school. Use the next 2 years in any way that you want that's related to your interest in medicine, science, health, human suffering, whatever it is. So that really rose to the top of our priorities in terms of expanding the program out. Mm-hmm. And the other, which is really linked to that, and Maisy mentioned as well, is so one is the academic and intellectual freedom, and the other is the stress. And they go hand in hand, relieving that stress for people, the stress of the application process and the cost of it, the stress of always having to second guess whether you're good enough, the stress of the MCAT, the wasted time. Maisy mentioned briefly that she was prepared to begin studying. She could probably describe to you what all of her friends had to do, what they had to sacrifice, the months and months of time that they could have spent doing research or learning how to be a medical illustrator. I mean, a million things that would give them more joy and would bring that joy to the practice of medicine is squandered on something like the MCAT. And I think maybe one of the most important things that we've proven since the very beginning is that you don't need that MCAT score to figure out if someone is an outstanding candidate for medicine. You just don't need it.
Yeah.
And can you dive into some statistics or general, either qualitative or quantitative research? I know, Dr. Kase, you just did a big survey and study. Could you bring some more or less hard facts to the table?
Hard facts. I hope that we have produced in that questionnaire method. I think that the important message of the responses has been that well over 98% were not only happy that they were physicians, they felt that they were good physicians, and had realized their own ideals and were offering the right kind of either effort for their patients or in research indirectly for patients. It's amazing how much they emphasized, not amazing so much as gratifying, how much they emphasized the importance of their varied backgrounds and how enriching they felt about that human experience through a liberal arts education. So quantitation, no, I would call it good qualification.
And I have to say that we have gotten just remarkable women and men into the class. Some of them in Maisy's class, a couple of them in classes that preceded hers. And like FlexMed and HUMED, they add something special to the environment here. Their background is different. Their lived experiences obviously are different. We're just really, really proud of that. There may be other things that come up in the future, other partnerships, but that one I think has really been another great step forward for us.
They also are older, so they make it so we can have class babies. So there's like babies that are taken care of by the whole class. It's awesome.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
Another added benefit.
Benefit, total benefit.
Absolutely. Is extending off of your comment, Dr. Muller, is Mount Sinai one of the few institutions that offers this non-traditional pathway? Do you know if many institutions offer this? Do you have any gauge as...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are up until I would say 5-7 years ago, there was almost nothing else nationally. In the last 5 to 10 years, a couple of other programs have cropped up. Some of them strikingly similar to ours, which is great.
Yeah, because
we love to be
sounds
copied.
like Mount Sinai is kind of the
greatest form of-
trailblazer there.
The greatest form of flattery, right.
Yep.
Most of them, as far as I know, have been on a pretty small scale. So, for example, a medical school will partner with a particular undergraduate institution, and that will be the partnership. None of them have come close to expanding it in the way that we did, both in terms of the numbers that enter the class every year and the number of schools that are eligible to apply.
Okay.
So we're still unique in that sense. I hope it catches on more. We would love the competition. Why not? I mean, every year when we look at candidates, there are, as I said before, hundreds of unbelievably qualified students who could fill a class, and they deserve the opportunity to have that early assurance for all the reasons that we described before.
Absolutely. And from all of your individual opinions, how would you like to see the program grow, and what does the future of FlexMed look like? And I don't know who wants to start.
The boss.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should be very happy where it is now. I think there's room for growth in both elements, the open-ended candidates as well as the liberal arts candidates. I think expansion of it and really undoing the burdens of the traditional pre-med so that they have an opportunity for at least some portion of the enrichment that the HUMEDs have or the militaries have. It's worth to devote yourself to diversity. It's worthy to welcome those that come off the ground by their own bootstraps.
So to take another step, a lot of what we've learned from the program from the beginning, but more so in the last 10 or 15 years, is seeing the cohort of candidates who apply, who clearly makes it in, who's just on the cusp. I mean, they're so good, but just, there has to be a cutoff somewhere. Which of those students, sophomores in college, who almost made it, who come from these communities, new Americans, immigrant families, underserved communities, that's fascinating to see that. And then the other piece of it is that we've learned a lot about what it's like to be in touch with these students over the course of their junior, senior year in college, their gap year or gap years. Some students aren't in touch with us at all, except for sort of the minimum reporting of your GPA, which is fine. But more and more students are in touch with us a lot. And we find ourselves advising, counseling them informally, but sort of bleeding into the formally. And we have just an incredibly rich resources here of faculty who are doing research and clinical mentors. Somewhere in the offing, which is, I think, an answer to your question, there's an opportunity for us to take those candidates who didn't make that first threshold, that first cutoff, who are almost there. And instead of spending 2 years as a pre-med being beaten down by people who tell them, especially if they're black and brown, that you're just not going to make it, having us counsel, advise, support them over the course of time and expand the program in that way would be unbelievably exciting.
It'd be another special medical school.
Maisy, how would you like to see the program grow or sustain, or what's the future like for FlexMed?
I think it's pretty simple, honestly. I think everyone would just like to see people who work in healthcare that look like America, that look like the place that we live. And we're not there. The people who work in healthcare right now don't always or don't often look like the people that they serve. We are still at a place in society where black and brown people do not get the same opportunities to practice medicine or to be in healthcare that white people often do. I think that just making FlexMed a platform for encouraging this type of diversity that Sinai has represented since its inception is just really the dream. And I think they do a wonderful job of it already.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Alumni Podcast. You can find this episode on our alumni website or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you.